Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is 6 o'clock and we have just turned the recording on. I think everyone in the room does know the evacuation procedure. Is that the case? I think everybody does, so I won't read that out again. Apologies, we have received apologies from Neil Phillips. Declarations of interest, are there any other than those printed? I would just like to declare that in regard to item 10, I am actually the LGA's representative from this authority. Representative from this authority, sorry, on the LGA and members board. Are there any others?
The one on the council. Item 11, I've had dispensation because I sit on the NABSAL board.
Okay. Community Enterprises Limited. The minutes of the previous meeting then, are they an accurate record for us? Happy, is that agreed?
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. Public consultation, we've got quite a few, so I think I'm going to leave them in the order they are. Just run through them. I've got an item 6, review of building control, Councillor Kondaka. Item 7, Councillor Kondaka and Michelle Kondaka. Item 8, Councillor Kondaka and Michelle Kondaka. Item 9, Councillor Wilson. Item 11, Councillor Richard Smith. Councillor Keith Kondaka, Michelle Kondacourt, Councillor Wilson and Councillor Golby. On item 15, Councillor Kondaka and Councillor Wilson. And on item 16, Councillors Kondaka and Wilson. I haven't received any other notification, so I'm taking that as the list of speakers at this stage. Right, item 6 is the review of the Building Control Partnership, and that is on page 17. In Neil's absence, Ian, would it be possible that you introduce this item? Thank you very much.
Building control is a statutory service, and the purpose of it is to protect the public and also to ensure various other building standards are in place, such as energy efficiency. It's the only statutory service that is subject to competition with the private sector. And the private sector is very active and very competitive in this area. So it's a service where we have to constantly review whether we are able to compete with the private sector and yet still maintain sufficient level of expertise to meet our statutory duties. Back in 2009, we concluded that the service was too small to be able to compete on its own, so we joined a partnership with North Warwickshire Borough Council, and that's served us very well since 2009. But as a result of increasing competitive pressures and the reduction in the market, the view is now that we are no longer large enough to be able to continue, even as two authorities. So we've looked at a range of options of different ways to provide the service in the future. And these are detailed in the report, and we've gone through a series of stages, gradually narrowing the options, until finally we've done a detailed business case for joining the South Staffordshire Building Control Partnership. That partnership currently comprises of 3 local authorities, but they're looking to expand to 6 local authorities. And they're looking to expand to try and ensure that they remain large enough to be competitive. They are currently very competitive, and they're trying to maintain that position. They have certainly welcomed our interest in joining, and they're going through their political decision-making process at the moment, with a view to ourselves, North Warwickshire and one other council joining them. The business case shows that by joining them, not only will we become more resilient, but we'll be able to offer the service to a higher standard for our customers and for lower fees and charges for our customers. So the move is beneficial all round, except insofar as there would be a cost pressure for this council upon joining the partnership of just over £20,000 per annum. That has to be considered against what would happen if we didn't join, as the service would potentially reach a point where we're failing in our statutory duties, and probably even greater cost pressures would arise, but it's not possible at this stage to quantify what they would be. That £20,000 can and will be absorbed as part of planning for the 2019-20 budget. The recommendation is that we do go ahead and join that partnership. In order to do so, we'll have to terminate our partnership with North Warwickshire Borough Council. North Warwickshire Borough Council are also going through the same decision-making process, but because they don't have a cabinet, they have to go through 3 decision-making stages. And they've already agreed to leave our partnership through 2 of those stages, with just the 1 final stage to go. So it looks as though they will leave our partnership anyway and leave us standing alone if we don't join the South Staffordshire partnership. So the recommendation is that we dissolve our partnership with North Warwickshire, that we join the South Staffordshire partnership. If we join the South Staffordshire partnership, the work we do for land charges and preparing copies of building control certificates will take us slightly longer, because as well as consulting our own database, we'll also have to consult their database. They are both services where we can fully recharge our costs, and therefore I've put in a recommendation to increase the fees for both of those services by just 71p, which is a small amount, but it's a high volume of work, so it does generate a few £1,000s to help to reduce the overall cost pressure. The other recommendations, E and F, are to delegate authority to myself and the Director for Arts, Leisure and Democracy to do the final legal agreements and other documentation that would be required to put the earlier recommendations into effect. And finally, the recommendation is that the financial implications be considered and resolved as part of the 2019-20 budget setting process.
Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you for doing that. I note that E and F also say in consultation with the Cabinet member.
Yes, absolutely, of course.
Just to make that clear. We do have Councillor Keith Condacor. Thank you, Councillor Condacor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll try to be quick because this is actually a thing we need to do. There's no dispute that we can continue as we are, and maybe we should have done this a year or 2 earlier. As a councillor, I get very little input or need to talk to building control, except a few people raising issues with some of the new build, both in my ward and across the St Nicholas ward. And it is appalling the way the government has allowed this service to be privatised out, because effectively we get a race to the bottom, where the standards of building control is nothing like what we had when councils used to do it. And unfortunately, unless we can change the law, there's nothing we can do to improve that situation. Building control will go to, particularly for the large builders, will go to a large conglomerate who will just pass off all sorts of dodgy building work, allegedly, and it is a real problem. And I know residents in Wellington who've had substandard new houses with wall ties missing, and that was signed off by building control. So it is a big worry, but I don't think we can do anything about it. And the only question I would have, just to double check, is what happens to the pension liability as the staff are moved across? Does it actually move something across to the Staffordshire pension? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Condacor. Ian, can you answer the issue on pension costs?
Yes, I can. There are 2 members of staff who would transfer, and they would transfer under the TUPE regulations. They would become employees of Lichfield District Council, and they would join a pension scheme similar to ours, and any existing pension liabilities will be addressed as part of that.
Okay. Any points of clarification to Councillor Condacor? Okay, then the recommendations are printed at A to G. Is anyone happy to move those? And is that agreed? Okay, then we'll agree that report. Thank you very much, Ian, for stepping in there for us. The next item is item 7. This is a quarterly review of strategic performance, and we normally do ask our managing director. I don't think we've had any of these since we had our new management arrangements, quarterly review. But I'm going to ask Brent and Simone if there's anything they wish to add to the report. It is there in depth, and the recommendation is that we review this to address any issues of potential need for improvements. Are there anything that either of you would like to add to this report or alert us to?
I've just drawn attention to pages 41 and 42, which is just a summary of the positive aspects and areas of improvement. They're the key issues that the report raises, and so I'm taking questions on those. And it is there is then a lot of commentary on the detail of the report.
Okay. Anything you wish to add, Brent?
No.
That's okay. Right, I've got Councillor Condar who wishes to speak on this.
Thank you, Chair. 2 points I wanted to take up on this. First, on page 49, it talks about the recycling, the aim to get to 60% eventually, as being amber. And it really, and I'm really frustrated that the Tories haven't called the garden waste changes in, and that we're actually going to go backwards on this quite considerably, particularly due to the level of charging. And nowhere in here is there any real comment about the impact of charging for garden waste, particularly at £40 rather than 20. I mean, Hinckley's 24. So we're really killing that target. And it will actually go from amber to red, because we'll never get to 60%. And the second point is on the risk bits, which are on page 51. We've actually added new risks onto our risk register about the borough plan, which aren't yet read, but I think need highlighting. And when this went to internal scrutiny, the internal scrutiny panel weren't given the risk register now. They were just given a link to the risk register. And there's 2 key risks in there about the politicians deciding not to go with the borough plan and the politicians effectively wanted to change the housing targets. There's new risks on there, and it's not referenced in your document. And the borough plan is coming to the danger zone. On Friday, you've got a meeting of the Joint Committee, which will be talking about housing numbers and talking about a big reduction in the statistics for Warwickshire's housing need. And I think those risks around the borough plan not being accepted, particularly because the basis on which it's produced, the housing numbers, are all changing. And whoever's going to the meeting on Friday will see an interesting report reducing the housing demand for Warwickshire from 42,000 to 29,000. So there's an awful lot changing, which is making the borough plan riskier and riskier. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Condor, I'm sure you appreciate this is looking back at the last quarter's performance.
I do appreciate that, but obviously there's things we're doing which would make the situation worse than where we already are.
Thank you. Are there any points of clarification? Can I thank you for your comments? Michelle Condor.
Thank you. There are just a few bits I sort of picked out and like clarification. Please. I mean, I understand that this is only printed in black and white, which is fine, but I did expect when I looked at it online that it would actually be in colour, that I could actually see what the bits were, because it really isn't terribly clear, so I don't know quite what's going on there. There were a few bits. Planning permissions for affordable homes is 31.8% against the 25% target. I just wondered where in the system is it reported actually what has actually been built, because planning permissions do not sort of translate immediately into things being done. I was also interested in the custom services handling 94% at the first point of contact. It's how that was actually recorded, because every contact I have had has always required a return call, so I just find it odd that I'm in the little 6% one, so I don't know how it's actually recorded and how accurate that is. Working days lost to sickness is always a concern, and I'm just concerned that fewer people doing the same amount of work is going to lead to more stress and things. I don't know, there's not a solution to that, I realise that, but it's just being aware of it continually. And the figures for October for the complaints does look a lot better and things, so I hope that that's actually been addressed and things. But on the FOIs things, it didn't seem terribly sort of clear. Average response rate 5 days, because that doesn't correspond at all with the figures that were at the OSP only a few weeks back, which were that a large number were outside of the timescale of 20 days. So I'm not sure how that comes about. There was somewhere saying about the annual development reviews that some new starters and employees who have declined a review. Surely actually having a review is in their job description, is it not? Because I find that very odd that they can actually decline having a review. I'd like some clarity on that. And then the red risks and things. Delays about delivering the borough plan and inadequate information management resulting in penalties applied by the Information Commissioner's Office. These are quite sort of serious things, and they're sort of just tucked in as one of the last paragraphs on the last page and things. I think the red things should be the first thing, so that is where the mind is absolutely focused on. Oh, 3 minutes is up.
Thank you very much. Are there any points of clarification? No, thank you very much for your comments. This is wonderful. I note your comment in regard to the pie charts. I think we have tried to actually say what colour they are within the pie charts, but I certainly take your point that big colour diagrams are sometimes easier to read.
Well, be online, not wasting printing.
But I think there is at least an attempt to say what they are. In regard to how many houses are built out as a result of planning permissions, I believe we have an annual monitoring of that report at a later stage, but it isn't included. This is just looking at your performance. And I really am sorry actually that the perception you have when calling customer services is what you say, because I actually want to place on record that I think customer services is one of those areas where we are actually improving service and
We've always had a very good experience. They've always been very friendly, but it's never been able to be solved at the first point of contact. That was my thing.
Okay, point taken. But I do want to place on record actually they're a very busy service, and my experience is that they are often able now to deal at first point of contact. So I think that is very, very positive. Any comments from anyone in regard to this report? Anything you wanted to come back on? No? So obviously it is that we... Oh, sorry, Jill.
It was just in terms of the performance management. We do encourage all our employees to have performance management as part of being a good council. They don't have to if they don't want to. It's not.
It's not mandatory.
It's not now.
That does have to be agreed with the line manager as well, so it's a two-way process.
Right, okay, so we're all clear on that. So Cabinet is obviously asked to review it. Are we all happy to agree that recommendation? Yeah. Thank you. We're then moving on to the next item, which is the General Fund and Housing Revenue Quarterly Budget Monitoring Report, Quarter 2 2018-19 update. Which is rather a long title, that. This report presents Cabinet with a forecast outturn for the General Fund and Housing Revenue account for 2018-19, based on information available at the end of September. Section 4 sets out the overall forecast outturn position, which is an adverse variance of 97,000 for the General Fund and a favourable variance of 161,000 for the Housing Revenue account. Further details are given at Appendix A of the main variances. Section 5 details the main spend pressures that the Council is facing for the year. The increased cost of recycling was reported to Cabinet in the Quarter 1 report. The only significant change for Quarter 2 is the increase in demand for temporary accommodation placements, which is leading to a significant cost pressure in year. The table at section 6 summarises the forecast outturn for the Council's main income budgets. Some of these, such as development control, are significantly exceeding original estimates. The General Fund Capital Programme has been updated to add 2 schemes for 18-19, and further details are given at section 8. We're requested to recommend this to Council for approval. I do have speakers on this. I have first of all Councillor Condarker.
Thank you very much, Chair. Turning to Appendix A, which is vertical on pages 58 and 59, this should be the same as what went to internal scrutiny, but it's quite different, so I don't know why it comes to different totals, because it's about £500,000 was the forecast outturn that went to scrutiny, and here we've got 344,000. Obviously, below the line items, we've then got a lot more coming back from the non-domestic rate pool. So it'd be nice if all the parts of the council had all the same figures and we didn't have this confusion. In terms of some of the detail, we have this climbing wall, still £46,000 a year was spent because we've trapped into a contract. I don't think it was at the light switch on in it, unless it was hiding somewhere, and it was contracted to be there. So it seems to do the Bedworth things, but not the Nuneaton things. And it's £46,000 a year for very, very little benefit. It's lovely climbing, but it needs sorting. Also, down the bottom, today the government released the data on council tax and things. We don't seem to have any revised figures for how much council tax we're actually collecting, and that's gone up quite a bit nationally. So on the line where it says we're collecting 8.4 million and the surplus is going to be 95,000, these sort of numbers haven't been updated. And what tends to happen is finance officers tend to give you the bad news to start with, and then they show you up later. It's sort of like, do you want the good news and the bad news? Which is not a bad thing, but it'd be nice to know if our council tax collection is actually doing better or worse than this 8.4 million. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. There may be some points of clarification. I just want to state that this is based on information available up to the end of September, not information as of today that you referred to, and you are aware of that, Councillor Condicle.
But it should be the same that went to scrutiny, though, because they were similar.
Are there any other points of clarification? Thank you very much for your comment. Simone, as our finance officer, I think Councillor Condicle made a point about different figures that we need to answer.
Yeah, two points of clarification, I believe. The reason that Councillor Condicle is right, the figures that went to OSP are different to this, and that's just because of timing. The OSP deadlines were earlier than the Cabinet deadlines, and we hadn't had the quarter two pull information back from the business rates pool at that point. And that's why the two figures are different. We have now built in that NNDR growth because the information we have from the county as our pooling lead body. So that explains that. And in terms of council tax, the accounting arrangements for council tax don't allow us to update council tax income during the year. So any adjustments to, so if we improve our collection rate during the year, that actually then is carried forward to the next year. Accounting arrangements do not allow us to adjust the council tax income at all during the year. That's why it's always the same regardless. The same with the collection fund surplus. You'll see any adjustments the following year.
Okay, thank you for that. I have got another speaker, Michelle Condicle.
Thank you. There were just a few bits. I mean, obviously, the cost of temporary accommodation is going up, and that is an issue. I just wondered whether any of the Cabinet had actually been visited the night shelter when it operates. It's starting again this weekend over the winter, because it's actually quite an eye-opener, and it's actually worth talking to the people who are using that to just get more of a picture and see what their issues are, and whether they've got any ideas of how they could be better, served. So that's just a, just a suggestion that. Again, car parking income comes up time and time again, and it always seems to be just below what you're expecting and things. But I've yet to see anything about how that is being addressed, other than each quarterly figures. Oh yeah, it's this, it's that, it's the other. So it'd be lovely to know from a public point of view, sort of what you're doing to try and address the drop. I mean, obviously, hopefully in the Christmas period, that will boost taking. So I know it's not an even thing throughout the year. On 7.2, I don't even know which page that was on now. 7.2. Oh yeah. About the Civic Hall Bistro. It says the changes to the Civic Hall Bistro haven't achieved the saving originally anticipated due to a slight delay in implementing the approved changes. and an enhanced service being offered. Well, I just don't understand. Why is an enhanced service being offered? I thought the changes were all approved and what have you. It just seems a bit odd. You either decide you're cutting this or you're not, and then suddenly an enhanced service, and then the figures don't all match up. It doesn't. Chris already touched on the climbing wall. It's still costing. I mentioned, I can't remember which meeting it was, whether it was scrutiny or whatever, that the advertising for it was on the Facebook for Active for Life and things. It said click on here and things, and then all the information was wrong. I did actually click on there today to see, and it just said events starting again from April 2019. So we've got month to month. Cost benefit must be absolutely appalling for it. For health benefit, you need to be doing something all year round, just have, and continually, week in, week out. So I know I go on about it every time, but it is a waste of money. So please get rid of it as soon as you can and get it off our books. And then Appendix C, I just found that a little bit confusing. Well, difficult to understand. Maybe I just don't understand these things. It's impossible to know from these figures what is actually being costed to the council, because there's like the Bermuda Connectivity Project, and every time they say, well, that's only the money that's just being sort of passed through the council. So how do I know which of these is just money being passed through the council and which bits are actually
Michelle,
money that the
Call.
council's
I
being
did let you go
spent?
on a little bit after
Well,
the
it was
buzzer.
just, it was just
Because I
finishing one.
wanted you to get your sentence in, but I do
Yeah.
need to bring you to a halt there. Are there any points of clarification? Can I thank you
Can
very
I
much?
just mention one other thing? I mentioned it last time, and we're still full of acronyms with nothing explaining what they are.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. I think acronyms are something that lots and lots of us in all sorts of public sector and private sector fall foul occasionally, but we will endeavour to sort out acronyms. Are there any points you need to come back on? No. Any points from the Cabinet? The recommendations are then printed at section 2. Are we happy then to send that through, first of all to note it, and then obviously to send it through to council for approval or otherwise? Yep. Okay. That brings us on to our next item, which is Treasury Management. The CIPA Code of Practice on Treasury Management requires the council to provide a mid-year report to inform members of the Treasury activity performance against approved indicators for the first half of the year. Section 4 of the report gives a brief update on the economic position and includes the latest interest rate forecast. The Treasury and prudential indicators for the current year are detailed throughout Section 6, with the capital spend indicator requiring an amendment due to the updates made to the capital programmes throughout the year. The reasons for the changes in the programme are explained in Section 6.3 and 6.4, and the updated indicator requiring approval is summarised in Appendix A. Section 7 details our investment portfolio and performance for the first 6 months. Investment performance is ahead of the benchmark, and forecast investment income is also exceeding budgets due to the upturn in investment rates from the budget estimates, and also higher cash balances available for investment. Section 9 summarises our borrowing position and shows our debt holdings and the maturity of that maturity profile of that debt. There are a number of changes being implemented regarding Treasury management, and these are laid out in sections 11 and 12. These include a new requirement to prepare the report and report a capital strategy, and some changes to regulations as to how we account for some of our investments. No Treasury or prudential limits have been breached, and there are no instances of delay in repayments from our investment counterparties. The Cabinet are asked to recommend that the report, including the update to the capital spend prudential indicator, be endorsed for submission to full council in December. We do have one speaker on this, Councillor Wilson. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and members of the Cabinet. As usual, when I speak on this particular item, I think the officers do a fantastic job in actually how they manage the money and how they comply with all of the legal and professional requirements that they have. Whilst around the room and in the chamber we may have our disagreements about where the money may be spent, I'm always confident about how the money is being spent. So that is a good thing. It is pleasing to see that our investment returns are improving in line with the increase in the Bank of England base rate. It remains to be seen whether that continues, but that's beyond our control. But hopefully we will see at least a maintaining of that, if not an improvement in that. But what I am slightly concerned about, Chair, is that whilst the money may be spent correctly in terms of some decisions which are about to be taken tonight, they are significant decisions which are about to be taken tonight, one in open session and one in closed session. That will have an impact on this report when it comes back for the final review. But as I have said time and time again, Chair, I have concerns about how we actually manage those projects moving forward. So whilst they will show on these books, we need to make sure that we, as far as possible, stick to that expected capital borrowing and not see a repeat of other situations we've seen across the borough.
Okay, any points of clarification, Councillor Wilson? No, thank you very much for your comments, Councillor Wilson. Any comments from Cabinet? Councillor Long.
Thank you, Chair. Just to put Councillor Wilson's mind at rest, it's as difficult getting projects and things into these programmes. It's really like sometimes getting blood out of a stone, I can assure you, because it gets very difficult, and quite rightly so, I suppose, in some respects. So you can try, you can go in on your knees if you like, but you don't get much sympathy. So it's one of those, and everything in here, you're absolutely right, is tightened down with a big spanner. So I'm happy with that, and all our spend is under control and under good management.
I think very strong business cases are made whenever we spend any money in the council, quite rightly so, because it is council taxpayers' money. I'd like to just ask a question, if I can, on page 77 of the report. A question, I think, for Craig. I happen to notice that we are getting quite a significant return from the CCLA investment there, which I just wondered, we obviously have £2 million invested in that. I wondered if there was any possibility of us looking forwards of investing slightly more in that.
It's something we continually look at, and it is a very long-term investment. We would look to ensure that we've got available resources for 5 to 7 years, so we do get a payback on it. So we will look at the future cash flow forecast. Our strategy does limit us to £3 million in that fund, so we have still got capacity for an extra £1 million, and it is something we do keep under review, and there is potential that we may have a look at putting additional funds in there.
But I think it's true to say, Craig and Simone and the team, we are very grateful that our finances are handled in the way they are, and I think there is unanimity in the council chamber when we do discuss treasury management that quite rightly we are taking the utmost care of council taxpayers' money. So I'd like to place on record our thanks to the team in that regard. Are we happy with the report and to refer this to council? Yep. Okay. The next one then is item 10, which is the procurement of insurance policies. This report requests Cabinet approval to complete a procurement exercise for the provision of the council's insurance services. This covers property and vehicles insurance, as well as the various indemnity and liability insurances that the council requires. The council's current insurance spend on insurance premium is in the region of £500,000 per annum. The new contract will be in place for the 1st of January 2019 to tie in with the expiration of the current contract. The recommendations are set out at section 2, and because of time scales involved in this process, the report has been marked not falling. I don't have any speakers on this particular item. Any cabinet member? Are we happy then to agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Thank you. Then coming on to item 11. Councillor Longdon, do you want to introduce this?
Thank you, Chair. I think the report itself is self-explanatory. I don't have any problems with it. And it's just to address what has already been identified tonight, I think, a growing social need, brought about mainly by the private sector landlords wanting to sell their properties, and also, of course, we have the ongoing problem of the benefit system, which a lot of people are dropping out through the bottom, and are homeless really because through no fault of their own. It's just a situation that they end up in, and so this idea came up, and we can do it, and at the same time we can save the council an awful lot of money, because if you see in the report, placements outside of the hostels are costing around about £100 a night, so it's £700 a week, and we get back from the government £98. So we're losing £600 per week on that, and that's a great hit on the revenue budget. So we are looking forward to this investment, and hopefully we are going to get a return in it in the medium term, I would think, because the money is going to be there coming in almost guaranteed, and it also helps to do away with this stigma that we've got now with homelessness, and of course we're including families in that. It's very difficult sometimes for families to get placements. If they can get a self-contained unit, they'll be very, very grateful, I think, whilst we're looking to get them rehoused. And part of the problem of that, of course, is that we've got 56 days before we can make a decision on what's going to happen with them. But that's the way it is, and that's what we've got to live with. So at the end of the day, I fully recommend this to Cabinet.
Thank you. Councillor Longdon. We've got 5 speakers. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually delighted to see this one come forward. It's something I've wanted for quite some time. I mean, homelessness is a terrible thing. To have over 70 families and individuals homeless at the moment is something none of us would want. And for the 42 families that are constantly moving from hotel room to bed and breakfast on a cycle weekly sometimes, far and wide away, it's even worse. They're not good living conditions for families. When I took on the shadow portfolio for this earlier in the year, one of the first questions I asked of the director was actually, what can we do with the council house? And can we use it for homeless accommodation? And we couldn't at that point, apparently, for lots of reasons. One of those was the cap on the HRA account. And I'm pleased to see the government have removed that now, because it not only frees us up to do this sort of thing, but it also allows us to expand our social house build and acquisition, which is at the core of the problem, really. The cost of external temporary accommodation is a huge burden. We've just heard it's £600 a room a week, so financially this makes absolute sense. The building's been empty for way too long, and I think it's costing us around 38,000 a year to have an empty building that will just dilapidate, and that's not a good situation. So although the conversion cost is at 1.25 million, I think it's an investment worth making, as long as it's delivered within budget. And although that cost is high, the benefits of the flexible spaces that can be converted for families or individuals is a great idea, and I think that's going to be extremely useful. Meeting and training rooms for partner support agencies on the ground floor does make sense. However, I've got some concerns around the potential safeguarding issues when we're mixing crash pads and night shelters alongside family accommodation. If that's going to be used for rough sleepers, and I'm not disagreeing with need spaces for rough sleepers, they come with special problems and needs, complex sometimes, and I'm not sure that's suitable for families. So I think a lot of thought has got to be given to safeguarding for the families and young children being housed probably for a longer period, several weeks in there. So I'd like some assurances that that element is well thought out and is going to be safe for the families that are lodged there. All things considered, I welcome it. It's a sensible proposal. It makes financial sense and it meets some of our most vulnerable residents' needs. So I'd ask the Cabinet to approve it.
Okay, points of clarification. I've got one, Councillor Smith, if I can. You talked about the lifting of the housing revenue account cap. Are you aware that actually the recommendation before us today is that it is general fund money, not related to lifting of the HRA cap?
Yeah,
you are aware of that?
I'm aware of that.
And I thank you very much, Councillor Smith. Thank you. Councillor Condar.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd also like to welcome this move. It should have been done a year or two ago, and I'd like to second a lot of the comments from Councillor Smith, and I think we've got fairly cross-party support that we desperately need to help these people. And it's an interesting statistic came out, I think yesterday, is about 20,000 of the families around the UK that are homeless actually have a job. Yeah, they're actually working, albeit on very low incomes, and they've somehow found themselves turfed out of where they live. And it is really important that we get the message out to the public. And there's been some dreadful things written on the internet about why are you letting scum live here? And it is appalling what people are saying about the homeless. And I think it is very, very important that we value and look after people and get them back into a safe and secure home. And it's far too easy just to lump homeless as a big category and think the worst of them, where the vast majority of them aren't there deliberately, they aren't there due to their own fault, they're due to the system and the way that landlords are selling up, how the benefit system's changed, and we need to reverse all that as quickly as possible. Hopefully get a different government in that starts to solve some of the problems we've got, and hopefully one day, maybe 5 years' time, we can then have this building having a third purpose, once we've actually started to tackle some of these problems. And the final point I'd just like to make is, Brent gave me a very useful briefing on this, and I'm fairly reassured about the cost of the project, having been told it's been quantity surveyed and it's got contingency. But it is also important that the running costs are looked at. And obviously, being an environmentalist, I'm keen that we have a few solar panels, we have some of the clever lighting that goes off when rooms aren't occupied, and obviously being homeless people, we're not expecting to pay the electric bill, so we need to actually make it so it automatically stays warm, is well insulated, and is cheap for us to run in terms of an operating cost. Thank you.
Thank you. Any points of clarification, Councillor Condar? Can I thank you for your comments? Michelle Condar.
I only just ask one thing actually, because most of the things have already been covered by the previous speakers. I just want clarification, because I can't believe that this new provision will be operational at the end of March 2019.
No, that's planning.
You can't do that in 3 months.
Can I thank you very much, Councillor? Sorry, Michelle Condor. Who's this? Chris Wills, Councillor Wills.
Thank you, Chair. From the outset, can I just declare an interest that I'm a director of NABCEL, so I might be viewed to have two hats on. I think it's important to make that distinction. We do know that the model that we are looking at tonight works. We've proven that with NABCEL. It is generating an income. It's generated to pushed through over £400,000 to the council. So this is something which is a win-win situation for us. It helps meet our social responsibilities of helping the most disadvantaged and the most vulnerable in our society and in our borough. It also helps sustain some of our services and generates an income for the council. Despite what we are constantly told, that most of the ills of things are down to universal credit, I think as a council, because I'm aware that there have been some, shall we say, keyboard warriors about on the social networks denigrating what this proposal is looking at, I think we need to make far more of the bullet points under paragraph 3.5 and really sell what we are doing, because the people who are most affected by this, it is quite clear that it is the cessation of a short-hold tenancy, victims of domestic violence and people who have been evicted by their family and friends. There could be sofa surfing, that's quite often a problem that we encounter. It isn't through universal credit, it isn't because they are dossers or layabouts, it is because they are at risk, they have been beaten, they have been psychologically or physically tortured by their partners, or they have fallen down on hard times, or they have a nasty landlord who just wants to, and I see it quite often, they see that the value of the properties are increasing, so they want the property back, they evict them to sell the house. And I think as a council we need to do far more about that. Councillor Smith is absolutely right. This is something that I asked him as my shadow portfolio holder for housing to look at after the elections, and it is something that he went away and worked on with Dawn Dawson about this. So this is something which will enjoy a broad consensus. There are some issues around there, and I think Councillor Smith is right in saying that if there are people who have their own different sets of complexities who are homeless, some of them street homeless, they may have drug issues, they may have mental health issues, they may have other issues as well. If we are putting families in those situations, there just needs to be some reassurance about safeguarding, because we have one set of people who are vulnerable in one way and another set of people who are vulnerable in another. I note it is going to planning committee, or will have to go to planning committee because it's council property as I understand it. That's when we had that chat with myself and Brent and Simone. I won't give any indication about that because I'm on the planning committee, but if it goes ahead, I might use the word if advisedly, then I hope it will be a massive benefit to the residents, both in terms of helping the vulnerable and in terms of helping us sustain services.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Any points of clarification? No, thank you very much for your comments. And the last speaker on this item, Councillor Colby.
Thanks. I'm going to take a slightly different tact than everybody else, because I think everything's really been covered. I do think people confuse homelessness with the beggars that we've got a bit of an issue with in the town centre at the moment, and some of those people are quite aggressive. Some of those people who are living in shop doorways are actually, the authorities have attempted to help and they are not accepting help. If a person who is in that situation is refusing help, there is not a lot you can do about it. That being said, we shouldn't then tar everyone with the same brush. I've noted that we're going to have disability accessible rooms with meeting rooms and training rooms, and I think it would be an ideal time to actually look to see if we can put in a adult changing facility in the building. It's a town centre location. We need a town centre location for an adult changing places facility. I've brought this to the council before. I think that would actually be a perfect opportunity to get that in and get it moving. If you're going to put it in a training facility, I think it's a consideration, at least a consideration to have. Again, mixing families with people who are going to need emergency accommodation in a night shelter scenario, probably as somebody with young children, I would be very, very cautious of that, not just because of the direct contact, but indirect. You've got noise, disturbance. If you've got children that are going to school, you're going to need to make sure they're in an environment where that potentially is not going to be disruptive. So hopefully that will be something that will be looked at. we're setting aside 5 rooms for a 12-week period for a winter night shelter, but what if those rooms are needed by families that we have a demand for? Are they going to be taken completely out of service for those 12 weeks? And if so, what are we then going to do with any families that do need overnight accommodation? Are we going to then be sending them off? And conversely, what are we going to do about prioritising families from our own borough over families that are being placed with us, or not with us, but within our area from other authorities? Because that does happen. We take Overspoke and Coventry and Birmingham, and likewise we put our families out as far as Tamworth. So how are we going to make sure that we prioritise our residents when they need it most? Because ultimately, if you haven't got a roof over your head, you need it most. Not to say that's to put down anybody else, but I think we need to kind of prioritise residents in this instance. And will the night shelter be staffed 24/7? That's something else that is something that I would like some answers to.
There were quite a few questions
Yes.
there rather than comments,
Yes, I'm
Councillor
sure.
Bowlby.
Yeah.
Any points of clarification? Can I thank you for your comments?
Thank you.
I'm going to bring in Dawn first. Dawn, there were a few concerns expressed about the mix of potentially people who need a night shelter provision with families, and about how that would operate. I wonder if you could give us some advice in that regard.
Yes, Chair. So the plans that are currently being developed, there is between us and the council house, there's what is currently a fire exit door. The way the plans are configured at the moment, that would actually create a separate entrance to a separate closed off area. So anyone using that part of the facility could not access the rest of it where we've got families and young children and others. So that would be completely separated. Internally, it will have a door so that when it's not in use as a sort of crash pad facility, it can be opened up so that that flexibility is there, so that if we have more families coming in and we don't have anyone in the crash pad area, then we can use it in that way. So what we're trying to do is make it as flexible as possible, so that we can accommodate as many different types of people as possible within our own borough.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think there was a question or a comment made by another speaker, I think it was Michelle Condacor, apologies if it wasn't you, but about this being up and operational by March 2019 as a concern with section 3.3, the very finals, it is actually about the Bedworth area office temporary accommodation, which we anticipate being available by 2019, March 2019. I think this is excellent that actually we have that up on board, and subject to approval today and subsequent planning approvals, etc. This one coming on stream after that. Councillor Longdon, did you wish to add anything at this stage?
I would say that hindsight is everybody's a genius with hindsight, aren't they? And what we could have done with this before, but we couldn't because we couldn't move on it. And I've been pushing people since May myself, and it was the government's first initial response about the high value voids and taking that out of the system as well, which prompted the situation that we may well have the money to do something with it. So that triggered it, and it's been going round and round until we get here. But could I just say, there is a confusion with the dates on that. On page 95 it does actually say that the planning application we hope will be granted in March 2019. Not the start. The start date won't be until probably June 2019, because you've got to go out for tender and procurement and all the rest of it, all red tape and all the rest of it, that we've got to jump to, all the hoops we've got to jump through, which I find very frustrating. I get round there with myself with a sledgehammer if I could and start for them, but it's not on me. So we should hope there, be hopefully on site in June. and get the conversion completed by January 2020. But I have put a marker down to say that I want it done before then if possible. I want it in 2019. I don't want it going over into another year. They're looking at me now, a few daggers coming across, but we'll see what happens. But at the end of the day, it really needs to be moved on and sorted out. The other thing that came up was the winter shelter. The plans are not yet ready, and they're in progress, but hopefully that will, as Dawn has just said, hopefully that will be a shut-off part that we can just have one entrance, sort that out so there's no mix of the people who have problems, who have been in there for a couple of weeks maybe, and the people who are coming in for a crash night over a 12-week period. So hopefully that will be done as part of the plans and getting through the planning situation. I don't think there's anything else I wanted to, apart from what Councillor Golby said. I'm not sure if we can look at that, but I'm happy to look at that. But at the end of the day, it's a different kettle of fish. Really, I think it's down to public health who should be providing that provision and not ourselves. But we'll look at it and see what can be done if possible.
Thank you.
I'm not giving any promises on that.
Any other comments? Councillor?
Yeah, just ask a couple of questions. When it was mentioned about us placing some people in temporary accommodation outside of the borough, what is the reason behind that, first of all?
We simply can't source anywhere within the borough.
Oh, okay. And the other one about taking, I mean, we've heard a lot of it on Facebook, etc. Some of those vile comments that have already been mentioned today. But taking people from outside of the borough, is that something we do?
No, I think there's probably two issues there. The first one is if any other council, housing authority around us wants to phone up an external B&B provider in our borough and place someone, we can't stop that. It's a commercial business, we can't stop it. So that's the first issue. The second issue will be if someone from outside of the borough presents to us as homeless, as the housing authority, we actually have a duty to place them temporarily while we look at their case. If we then decide that there is a homelessness case, we then refer back to their authority that they've got the most connection with. But if they present to us under the legislation, we have to deal with it.
Okay. Thank you. That's what I was trying to get at, because there is a lot of confusion over what the legislation states, i.e. what we have to do by law, and I think you've cleared that up. For me, I mean, I don't think there's a councillor in here who hasn't had, over the years, an appalling situation with a young or old family, you know, that have gone through personal circumstances that have put them in a position where they've had to move out of their property, or they've been thrown out of their property, as you say, by landlords that want to sell the properties. It's the most upsetting time and depressing time that any family can go through when they're faced with this. Anything we can do to relieve that situation through this extra accommodation, and putting this accommodation on is a bonus to the residents of this borough. Because I mean, you can't mention them, but I've had some really appalling situations that have been dealt with very, very well, I've got to say, by the housing department. And on some occasions, you know, very, very swiftly. So I'm totally in favour of this project, and also of the Bedworth project that is going to be finished, as say, in March, I think you were saying it was, that's going to help people, because the last thing we want to do when people are in this very depressing situation is to move them outside of the borough, away from the schools, and some cases away from their work, so they can't get to work, they can't get to the kids to school, you put an extra burden of cost on them, etc, etc. Just because we can't find a place to put them in B&B within this borough. If we can relieve that situation in any way, and I think it will when these come online, it'll be a benefit to the people that live around here and the people who are in this situation, which is appalling. And I've got to echo some of the comments that were made about fake news on social media. Social media do a lot of harm to these families. These families read that, and it adds to the stress of those families. I know of at least one family that have read information on these Facebook pages, and it's put them in a very upsetting situation. Sometimes the kids, the children, do not know everything that's going on. And when they read this rubbish that's on these pages, on Facebook pages, then, you know, it upsets them as well. So when people are publishing information on there, please give a thought for those families and for those children, and don't just publish fake news.
Thank you. I want to just seek one reassurance. I'm 100% in favour of providing high quality accommodation for families, people who find themselves unfortunately homeless, and that can happen to any of us. I remember reading an article, you're only so many paychecks away from finding yourself in this position. It can happen to absolutely everybody. One of the things I find particularly helpful about our accommodation is that it does have cooking facilities, it does have fridges in rooms, it is high quality. And if you are placed in B&B accommodation, it can cost an awful lot. You are already homeless and you're adding yet more burden on families if they've got to then eat in different ways. So I just want to be absolutely assured that we're going to provide those cooking facilities, those fridge facilities, that high quality that I have seen firsthand in other hostels we have, that provide a more welcoming atmosphere for families who find themselves in these really unfortunate positions. So I really just want to dawn, yes, you can assure me, or no, unfortunately not.
Don't forget about the laundry facilities.
And the laundry facilities, very important, Barry, very important.
That's included.
Yes, Chair, I can assure you we're carrying on with the blueprint, and as Councillor Longden's just said, we're actually putting a laundress in because it's going to accommodate quite a few people. The plan is to put a laundress in as well.
And I know many councillors will have visited our hostel accommodation, and I know I always go into them of the view of how would I feel if I was in that position with my family, and I've always found them, although not where anyone wishes to end up, they are at least inviting and high quality places of safety. So I'm prepared, Councillor Longden, to move this recommendation.
I've already moved it.
You've already, well, can I second it then?
Yes, of course you can.
Are we all happy with the report? And I thank you very much, and thank Housing as well for the good work. Really looking forward to March 2019 when further units come on board in Bedworth, and then I'm sure Councillor Longden, as he's already said, his intention is if you can squeeze any shorter time scales in, I'm sure you'll be discussing.
Well, I don't see why we can't hit September, but...
Okay, that does bring us then. Thank you for that. Back to our agenda. Recommendations from overview and scrutiny panels. We don't have any. None have snuck in that I don't know of, no. Any other items? I'm unaware of any other items. And then we are moving to item 14. There are some confidential items. Are members happy to move the exclusion of public and press under the relevant local government act? Lovely. Thank you very much.